There are two ways in which any government can proceed. One is a way based on what you and I would call a free society, which is enshrined right at the heart of the American Constitution. The other one is a way which allows only one view, both of economics and politics, in which almost everything is either owned or controlled by the state, including the media, including the ideas, including freedom of discussion and everything. There is no freedom of discussion. Now, between those two ways, the free society and the totally controlled society, there are, of course, variations. I think what we've learned in Britain is that we've gradually, over the last certainly 12 or 13 years, with perhaps a little interruption, gone slowly further and further away from the free society towards something else. At the same time, we found, I don't find it strange, but some other people do, that we have stopped creating wealth. We've had a large number of increasing restrictions. And you've been finding two things. First, that we are more and more concentrating on redistributing the wealth we've got, rather than creating any more. To create more, you need a slightly freer society, and you need an incentive society. Naturally, when I see that happening, I look with very great alarm to societies which have gone even further left. That is, they've tried to redistribute even more and haven't had the incentives for people working hard on their own account, doing well for their families, and often then being able to create jobs for others. They've produced a much more prosperous society than we have.
We fight on the beaches, we shall fight on the landing ground.
Thank you for joining us. You are listening to A Radio, and this is The Morning Moment. We're on weekdays, 11:45 Eastern. Follow us on Spreaker.com and click on the like button. This piece is from Fox & Friends, August 25, 2019. The views from the Democratic candidates really does sum up their total incompetence and the fact that they are clearly totally mismatched against Donald Trump. Their view on the China policy is just more of the same, except for one, who says the US has to outcompete China. It's difficult to know what to say with that, isn't it? How can you outcompete a country that subsidizes all its manufacturing and pays its workers peanuts? And they dare not complain, otherwise God knows what would happen to them. Yet we in the West continue to deal with them as though they're a normal player. I, for one, think there's something wrong with this equation. I, for one, don't think we should trade with China. My favourite sport, which is Formula One racing, mollycoddles them, treats them like a normal contender. Why Formula One goes to China is beyond me, other than for money. China is a very dangerous country, and I have to draw the same conclusions and the same comparisons as I've done previously with Nazi Germany. That being, we underestimate China at our own peril. Many of us do not underestimate China, but there are many on the left who want to turn a blind eye. Those are the same type of people who tried to turn a blind eye with Adolf Hitler's activities. Now, I'm not saying the same things are going on per se in China, but the principle is the same. How can we deal with a country whose intention, their 100-year intention, is to destroy your country and mine? They're keeping their own citizens at bay. They're introducing 5th-generation technology to monitor all their citizens and make sure that they don't step out of line. Yet, we are buying goods and services from this country, and we're about to buy the next generation of goods and services from this country. I don't get it. Coming back to the Democrats, though, their views are totally delusional, and their views know no bounds. The Gang of Four have been exposed in the United States and are really the ones in charge. Not Speaker Pelosi, but the mainstream media cover that up. They do a good job of covering that up, don't they? Mike Huckabee explains in simple terms the issues and the facts behind these real attacks on President Trump. The mainstream media, not just in the US, marches lockstep with each other, even to the extent of regurgitating the same talking points in every country. Now, this is a short but sweet piece. The links, as always, will be on my site, but as usual I have to put the caveat in. That being that as long as they, that's Fox News, allow them to be. Here's that piece. And remember, when you hear Donald Trump talking the way he does, don't you think he really knows what China's about? Isn't it better to trust him, a businessman, than a politician who lies every day of the week just to get votes? Here's that piece.
But we do want to get your take on what's happening at the G7. The president going there with priorities to put America first, putting trade atop and the economy atop the list when you've got other global elites who prefer to talk about other things. Your reaction to how the president is performing so far there?
Well, I think he's doing exactly what many of us want him to do, and that is to take a tough stand against the cheating that's gone on in the trade deals. The president's for free trade. So am I. So are most every person I can think of, but free trade isn't free if it isn't fair, and it hadn't been fair in a long time. You've had China cheating, stealing intellectual property, and taking designs and then selling them off as their own. You have them cheating and going to third countries, pretending that it's actually coming out of a country when it's really coming out of China, which then devastates a lot of American businesses, particularly the steel industry is one that's been hit hard. These are the kind of things that have been going on, and businesses, these multinational globalist corporations, have just looked the other way at the expense of American workers. So this is a president who finally says enough of this. We're not going to be chumps. We're not going to be bullied. We're going to fight back. We're going to put a level playing field. America can play, but it can only play when everybody's playing by the same rules. We ought to be saluting and thanking this president. And yes, there is some short-term pain for this, but the long-term gain means that China doesn't just take over the world with all of us surrendering and even being unwilling to challenge them.
Yeah. Governor, you know, it's no surprise that 2020 Democrats have been slamming President Trump's China policy while he has been abroad. Let's take a listen to what they've had to say and get your reaction.
What we need to do is strategically engage China in mutual interests in stability in the Pacific Rim and around the world, and recognize that the best way to compete with them is not to poke them in the eye with tariffs.
Trade policy, a foreign policy, and a domestic policy that has people wondering in the markets how stable this administration is.
I think the president has botched this thing. We've got to outcompete China. There's no way to just do this through trade and tariffs and all this nonsense.
What do you think, Governor?
Well, what they're all pushing for is the status quo. The status quo, which has been pushed by both Democrat and Republican administrations. So let's be fair. This isn't a Democrat problem. Republicans have been, if not equally guilty, sometimes more so, because many of them have been globalists. They have been of the mind that we'd rather have the next quarter of profit and to heck with the long-term impact of that. So we've surrendered to China, and these Democrats are sounding the same thing. But it's not that unlike what Republicans have sounded. President Trump is the first person who's come on the scene in a position of authority who said, enough of this. We're not going to continue to be treated like punks and chumps. And he's fighting back. Well, that's what we elected him to do, and I hope he continues. And yes, it's not always pretty, but if we don't do this, then we better learn to speak Mandarin, because that's where we're headed in this world, because they aren't playing fair. And I'll tell you something, these other nations may pound their chests and pretend that, oh, I wish Trump wouldn't do this. Deep down, there's not many nations who aren't cheering him on behind the scenes, hoping he will get China tamed.
Governor, well said. I mean, as good of a summary as I've heard anyone put out there of the stakes. What you're saying also is that he's unafraid, he's undeterred, whereas other presidents have been afraid of that. Well, according to one member of the House of Representatives, who's a member of a group called the Squad, Rashida Tlaib has a different view of what the president may be afraid of. She said this to The Guardian in an interview. She said, it's been very clear to me, especially this last week, that he's scared of us. He's afraid of women of color because we're not afraid of him, and we're not afraid to speak up and say that we have a white supremacist in the White House who has a hate agenda. He's afraid because we have a real agenda for the American people. So is she onto it, Governor? Is he just afraid of her?
They're delusional. I mean, that Donald Trump is afraid of 4 freshman members of Congress who are anti-Semites, who hate Jews, who hate Israel, who support the BDS movement that would be as devastating to Palestinians as it would to Israelis, as people who show no respect for the basic institutions of this country. I don't think he's afraid of them. I think he finds them amusing, but he also finds them annoying. The real issue here is not how they relate to Donald Trump. It's the fact that they have co-opted Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, and the rest of the Democratic leadership, and they're now running the Democratic Party. Look, they are the best thing Donald Trump has going moving into the 2020 election. If they continue to be the face and the voice of the Democratic Party, then there's no need to book a furniture mover to get the Trump stuff out of the White House. They'll be there another 4 years.
And lastly, Governor, so it's your prediction then that Nancy Pelosi, Speaker Pelosi, has lost control and can't rein in the so-called squad?
Yeah, she's trying to push a rope here, and it's not working real well. She has not been able to contain them, to control them, or even to ameliorate the damage that they're doing to the brand of the Democratic Party. So as long as they're the voice and the face, good. I think Republicans are in a much better position for that.
Thanks for being here, Governor. I'll tell you, never a dull moment in the news these days.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Governor.
That is for sure, Jedediah. Thanks.
You can find more at aradio.wordpress.com, where you can find links to us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Gab, and email. We are also on Spotify. Just go to the podcast section and type Canadian Politics with a twist, and you'll find us. We are continuing to reach out to you, so please pass on the links. Please click on the follow button on Spreaker.com. You can listen to all our morning moments at Spreaker.com under A Radio. That's EHRADIO, A Radio. And please click on the like button. And you can now hear a weekend review of our podcasts on WHBJ DB, News Talk Radio. Join us and many others. And you can find all our podcasts and morning moments at aradio.wordpress.com. Click on the Morning Moments tab.